I'm going to talk about a fact of physical reality that I can use as a metaphor, that we can all use as a metaphor for thinking outside of mere physics for the bigger picture. Now, this is a process that I justify, not by faith exactly, but since I look to reality for all of my knowledge, it makes sense to me that the patterns that we see in physical reality among, the physically traceable objects are patterns that we will see, in the human universe as well. And it gives us insight on how things work. And I use this a lot in my thinking. And I was thinking I should probably make some videos specifically on how some of these metaphors work. So I'm going to start with the metaphor of gravity. Now, there are four fundamental forces of nature in the universe. There is the strong interaction, which is what holds the nucleus of an atom together. There's electromagnetic forces, which we understand, and interestingly enough, that used to, for a while, be thought of as two different things, magnetic and electrical field interaction. Turns out they're tightly unified. There's the weak force, which is responsible for radioactive decay and neutrino interactions. It's very weak. And there is the gravitational force. Now, by far the weakest of these forces is gravity. Now, if you look out in space, what you see, the shape of the things that you see, is largely determined by gravity, the weakest of the forces. And that is not necessarily intuitive. I mean, you would think that if you looked out in the universe, you would see the effects of the strongest forces on the biggest scale, right? They're stronger, so they should have bigger effects. But that's not how it works. And the reason is because a weak force is, it's always working, but it works weakly and slowly. So on a large scale, on large time scales, that's when you're going to see it. So for example, electromagnetic forces are responsible for why, you know, an object seems solid, because it works over a very short range, but as soon as you touch the surface of something, you can't go any further. The deceleration of my fingers as they hit the tabletop and probably make bad noise sound on the mic um, is fast enough that it looks immediate. Whereas if I drop an apple, I can see it fall. It moves slowly. So the weak force is something you see the effects of over a longer time scale or over a larger spatial scale. So when you look out at space and you see galaxies, the swirling pattern that you see in so many galaxies, that's due to the way gravity works. So taking that metaphorically back into the world of man, uh, we have a similar thing. If the force is the force of willpower, using this metaphor, we would not expect the shape of society to actually be the result of the strongest wills. Okay, it would be the result of the weaker wills. Okay, uh, it's like the tortoise and the hare. The tortoise is going to win in the long range. The stronger forces are, by their nature over time, really going to come out to be sprinters. They do things quickly, they do things locally, and you see their effects locally. Now, an important part of this metaphor is to understand weakness in a particular way. We're not talking about weakness of, say, somebody that's weak-willed, and sometimes they're against thievery, but sometimes they do nothing about it, and sometimes they do something weak. The force of gravity isn't like that. It's always working. So we're talking about weak interactions, but that are always present. So a weak person is not going to be one holding their tongue in this metaphor. They're going to be one that, instead of getting all in your face and being aggro, is just going to say, hey, don't steal, or maybe try something fairly gentle to take the property back, or whatever they do, as opposed to jumping in your face, knocking you down, and taking your what you've stolen back from you. Now, I'm not saying that it's better to do the weak thing. I think it's situational, and it depends. I'm just saying that in the long run, you'd expect the person who is is weak and somewhat more gentle about their point to have an effect in the long term. And in the short run, you would expect the person that is very overt and what we would think of as a strong will to have more of an effect in the short term. So, for example, in the family, you would expect strong wills to show more of an effect. And we do see that. We see, for example, our strict model metaphor of families that we have traditionally with the strong-willed male and strong-willed parents, and it has a strong effect on how we think of family. Whereas socially, we do see more of a cooperation, we do see more compassion, we see some of the things associated with less strong wills. So in the end, the terms weak and strong become suspect the way we use them, because gravity is obviously a strong force in the sense of its long-term impact. So over millions of years, you could say gravity was the stronger force. We say it's weaker because the actual force is weaker. And so what I would draw from this metaphor is that to be gentle but never give in has a stronger effect in changing society than to be irate and overt and an asshole um, does. But in the near term, you might save your life or get your stolen goods back, and you might want a strong force. But if you're trying to change society, something that evolves over centuries, then you're likely to do best by simply always working for what you believe, but doing so in a relatively gentle way.